When I first met Evan, he seemed like the kind of man I'd been waiting for. Soft-spoken, attentive, always asking about my day and never interrupting when I spoke. He had that calm confidence that made people trust him without question. He wasn't loud or boastful. He carried himself like someone who had nothing to prove. We met through a mutual friend at a small get-together. He was sitting alone on the porch, smoking, looking lost in thought. I remember how he smiled when I said hello. That slow, easy smile that looked like it belonged to a man who had seen enough of life to appreciate the quiet moments. It didn't take long for me to fall for him. He said all the right things, made me feel seen in ways no one had before. When I was with him, the world felt softer, like all the noise faded away. I didn't realize back then that he was studying me, not loving me. Evan told me he was between jobs, trying to get back on his feet. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has rough patches. I had a good job at a design firm, steady income, and I was always the kind of person who wanted to help. He would say things like, "You don't know how good it feels to finally have someone who believes in me." And I did believe in him. I told him he didn't need to worry. I could cover dinner this time or pay for gas or help out with his phone bill just until things got better. It didn't seem like a big deal then. Love, I thought, was about teamwork. But love can turn into a transaction faster than you realize. One night, I woke up to the sound of his voice in the living room. He was whispering harshly into his phone. I could only hear fragments. "I told you, I'll get it by next week." "No, she doesn't know anything." "I said I'll handle it." I remember lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. The next morning, he was back to his usual self, making coffee, humming softly, kissing my forehead before leaving. When I asked who he'd been talking to, he just smiled and said, "A friend, don't worry about it." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But belief started to feel like blindness. A few days later, I noticed he was growing restless. His phone would buzz, and he'd step outside to answer it. He started borrowing small amounts of money more often. $50 here, $100 there. Always with a story. He said his car insurance lapsed, then it was his cousin's hospital bill, then some unexpected business expense. I wanted to think he was just struggling, but the stories never quite lined up. Then one night I came home early from work. He didn't hear me at first. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his phone on speaker. A man's voice on the other end said, "You've got until Friday, Evan. I'm not joking this time. If you don't pay, I'm coming by myself." Evan's hand trembled slightly as he rubbed his forehead. "I'll get it. Just give me a few more days." The man laughed bitterly. "Don't make me chase you. You know how that ends." I froze. My heart was beating so loudly, I thought he'd hear it. I stepped back quietly and left the room before he noticed. That was the night everything clicked into place. He wasn't borrowing money because he was struggling to get on his feet. He was borrowing because he was drowning. And I was the rope he was using to keep himself from sinking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark window, and realized how deep I'd fallen into something built on lies. The man I thought I loved wasn't my partner, he was my debt. The next morning, I looked at him differently. He kissed my cheek before leaving, and I smiled back like everything was fine. But inside, I was already gone. I didn't confront him. I didn't demand answers. What was the point? A man like that doesn't tell the truth because he doesn't see it as something he owes. He owed money, he owed apologies, but truth? That's never part of the deal. So I decided to wait. Not out of fear, not out of love, but because I wanted the truth to reveal itself, without me having to lift a finger. And something told me it would.
Over the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I still smiled when he came home late. I still made dinner, asked about his day, pretended not to notice the tension in his shoulders or the growing panic in his eyes. He started talking faster, moving nervously. He'd get random calls and leave the apartment for hours. His excuses became sloppy. Then one evening, he came home with flowers. "I've been thinking," he said softly, handing them to me. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't say that enough." He kissed my forehead, then looked away too quickly. The kind of look you give when guilt lives behind your eyes. I smiled anyway. "That's sweet," I said. But as I put the flowers in water, I saw his reflection in the glass, restless, distracted, like a man waiting for something to explode. 2 nights later, it did. We were watching TV when there was a sudden knock at the door. It was heavy, urgent. The kind of knock that doesn't belong to friends or neighbors. Evan froze, his face drained of color. He didn't say a word, just stared at the door like it might swallow him whole. The knock came again. Louder this time. "Evan!" a voice shouted. "You think you can keep hiding?" My stomach turned cold. He whispered under his breath, "Don't open it." But I did, because I was done pretending. When I turned the handle and saw the 2 men standing there, thick jackets, tired eyes, anger etched into their faces, I finally understood the scale of the mess I was living in. One of them looked past me and said, "Well, there he is." And in that instant, I saw fear on Evan's face for the first time. It was almost beautiful. Not because I wanted to see him suffer, but because it was the truth, raw and unfiltered. The lies were over. And for the first time in months, I felt alive.
The moment I stepped aside, the air in the apartment changed. It was like the room itself understood something irreversible had just begun. The 2 men didn't waste time. They walked in with that heavy confidence that belongs to people who have done this before. One was older, bald, and wearing a thick leather jacket. The other was younger, sharp eyes that didn't blink much. Both of them looked tired, like men who had chased this story for too long. Evan stood frozen near the couch, his hands half raised, like he wasn't sure whether to defend himself or surrender. "Gentlemen," he said weakly, "you can't just—" The older one cut him off. "Save it." His voice was deep, gravelly, calm in the way that makes you more afraid. "We've heard all your excuses." The younger man smirked. "You've been dodging calls for 3 weeks, man. We're not here for small talk." I didn't move. I didn't interfere. I just stood by the kitchen counter, arms folded, watching. Evan looked at me, pleading, almost begging with his eyes. But I wasn't his safety net anymore. Not tonight. The older man reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded paper, and tossed it onto the table. "Final notice," he said. "You either pay tonight or you start losing things you care about. Simple math." Evan's hands were shaking. I just need more time. I've got something coming in. A deal." "A deal? You said that last month." "I swear it's different this time," Evan's voice cracked. "I've got a girl." He stopped himself too late. Both of them turned toward me. "A girl, huh?" the older man said slowly, then looked at me with a kind of pity that stung more than anger. "That's you, sweetheart?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My silence told them everything. Evan's face turned pale. "No, she doesn't—" I cut him off quietly. "She knows." That stopped him cold. The younger man raised his eyebrows. "Well, at least one of you's honest." For a long moment the room was dead silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. When Evan finally spoke again, his voice was small. "Please, just give me a few more days." The older man sighed.
We're not here to ruin your life, kid. You did that yourself. He turned toward me. Sorry you got dragged into this. We'll handle him. I nodded once. Go ahead. It was strange, the calm that washed over me then. I expected to feel panic, maybe shame. But all I felt was clarity. A sharp, still kind of peace. Evan's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at me as they told him to sit down, as they reminded him of the money he owed, as they listed the amounts, the deadlines, the threats he had ignored. I watched him shrink into himself with every word. It was the first time I saw him without his charm, without his lies, without that practiced smile he used to disarm me. Just a scared man sitting in his own wreckage. After a while, I walked to the sink, filled a glass of water, and took a slow sip. The older man looked at me again, like he was trying to decide if I was going to scream or interfere. I didn't. When he realized I wasn't going to make a scene, he softened just slightly. Ma'am, he's not dangerous, just stupid, but you might want to think about where you fit in this story. I met his eyes and said quietly, Oh, I already have. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good, because when people like him go down, they usually try to drag someone with them. Then he turned back to Evan. We'll give you 1 week. After that, it gets ugly. They left without slamming the door, which somehow made it worse. The silence that followed was heavier than the visit itself. Evan slumped on the couch, head in his hands. I could hear his breathing, shallow, panicked, broken. When he finally looked up, he said, You shouldn't have opened the door. I stared at him. Why not? You were expecting them. He stood, pacing. You don't understand. These guys they don't care about rules. They'll take everything. I tilted my head slightly. Everything? He stopped pacing, realizing what I was really asking. You mean my things, right? My apartment? My money? He didn't answer. That's what this was about, wasn't it? I said softly. You weren't building a future with me, you were buying time. Evan's jaw tightened. That's not true. I love you. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it sounded. Hearing, I love you, from a man who treated me like a loan. You love what I could give you, I said. You love comfort. You love escape. You never loved me. He tried to step closer. Please, you don't understand what it's like. I was desperate. Desperate people ask for help, I said. You took advantage. He looked down, shame flickering across his face, or maybe just fear. That night he slept on the couch. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling again, realizing how quiet everything had become. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel heartbreak anymore. Just a kind of finality. Somewhere between his lies and my patience, I had already said goodbye. I just hadn't walked out the door yet.
The next few days felt like walking through the last act of a play I had already seen too many times. Evan's desperation grew louder. His words became quicker, messier, his laughter thinner. He still tried to smile, to act like nothing was wrong, but it showed in the way his eyes twitched, the way his hands trembled when he reached for his coffee. I stayed quiet, not out of fear anymore, but because I wanted to see him face the truth without my voice softening the blow. The phone calls came more often now, unknown numbers, late at night. He stopped answering them after a while, but I could see the tension in his shoulders every time the screen lit up. Sometimes he turned his phone face down and just sat there in silence, pretending it wasn't happening. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. On Wednesday, he came home carrying flowers, cheap ones, the kind you buy at a gas station when you're trying to look like you still care. He placed them on the table, clearing his throat. "They're for you." I didn't move. "Why?" He smiled nervously. "Because I've been an idiot. I know I've hurt you. I don't want to lose you. Not now." I looked at the flowers.
"What is it?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The man set the envelope down on the coffee table. "We've filed notice. You've got 72 hours to pay or face repossession. And if any of this was taken under false pretenses," he looked at me again, "you might want to talk to your bank." And then he left, closing the door softly behind him. The room stayed silent for a long time after that. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and cold. Evan tried to speak. I was going to pay it back. I just needed—" "Stop," I said sharply. He froze. "Just stop lying." He tried to move closer, but I stepped back. "You used me," I said. "Every dinner, every gift, every night you looked at me like I was your future. It was all part of your escape plan." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to—" "But you did." I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He didn't deserve them. Not anymore. I zipped the suitcase closed. "I hope someday you understand what it means to really lose something you love." He reached for me, but I stepped around him and walked to the door. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about one last word, one last glance. But no. Some endings don't need sound. I opened the door and stepped into the cold hallway, leaving everything and everyone that had drained me. The air outside tasted like freedom and ash. I stood under the streetlight breathing, my hands trembling from the rush of everything that had just happened. Behind me, through the thin apartment walls, I could hear muffled shouting. His phone ringing again, his voice breaking as he answered. More panic, more lies. It was poetic, really. All that noise, all that chaos. And me, finally silent. Finally done.
The first morning after I left him, I woke up in a friend's spare bedroom, a small, quiet space with soft yellow curtains and a faint smell of lavender. The silence was different there. It wasn't heavy or filled with dread. It was peaceful, like a sigh after years of holding your breath. I sat up slowly, feeling the ache in my chest, not from love anymore, but from release. For so long, I'd been holding his world together, pretending, fixing, absorbing the damage he caused. Now, all that weight was gone. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 10 missed calls, 3 voice messages, all from him. I didn't listen to a single one. Later that day, I went to the bank. The woman at the counter was kind but professional. She listened carefully as I explained what had happened, the withdrawals I hadn't made, the transfers I hadn't approved. When I handed her the papers, she frowned slightly, typing quickly on her keyboard. Then she looked up and said, "It seems some of these accounts were accessed using shared authorization. Did you give anyone permission?" I shook my head. "No one." She nodded, her expression tightening. "We'll begin an investigation. You'll be notified." There was a small pause before she added, "You're not the first woman I've seen sitting in that chair because of someone she trusted." I smiled faintly. "Maybe one day you won't have to say that anymore." When I walked out of the bank, I felt something settle in me. The beginning of justice, quiet but certain. That night, I stayed at my friend's apartment again. Her name was Lila. She'd been my roommate years ago before Evan came into my life. She didn't say much, just made tea and let me sit on the couch in silence. After a while, she said softly, "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" I nodded. "Not at first, but once you stop pretending, the truth gets loud." She smiled sadly. "You always gave too much, you know?" I thought that's what love was, giving. "It is," she said, "but not when the other person's just taking." Her words stayed with me. 2 days passed before the next storm hit. I was walking home from a small grocery store, a paper bag of fruit and bread in my hands, when my phone buzzed again. This time, not from Evan, but from a mutual friend. Her message was short. "You might want to check the news." I froze in the middle of the sidewalk. When I opened the link she'd sent, I felt the world tilt a little.
There it was. His name, his picture, his downfall. Local man faces fraud allegations amid rising debts. The article wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It told the whole story in a few paragraphs. The unpaid loans, the bounced checks, the small-time schemes he'd been running to buy himself time. The same schemes that had led him to me. There was even a line about misappropriated funds from a partner's account. My account. But they didn't name me. For once, anonymity felt like a blessing. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel pity. I just sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the glass, and thought about how everything eventually comes full circle. Evan had built his life on borrowed time. Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar taken, they'd all caught up to him. And I hadn't had to lift a finger. He had done it all himself. The next morning, he showed up. It was early, barely 7, and the knock was frantic, uneven. Layla peeked through the curtain and sighed. "It's him." I felt my heart thud once and then go still. "Do you want me to tell him to leave?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I'll handle it." I opened the door. He looked wrecked, unshaven, eyes red-shot, wearing the same jacket he'd had on the day I walked out. There was no charm left in him, just fear. "Please," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at him, silent. "They're freezing my accounts," he said. "They're taking everything, my car, my things. I can't fix it without your help." There it was again, that word, help. I felt a strange calm wash over me. "Evan," I said quietly, "I already helped you. I gave you my time, my trust, my money. You took all of it." He shook his head violently. "No, no, that's not fair. You don't understand what they'll do to me." "I do," I said softly. "That's why I left before it happened." He reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back. "You don't get to touch me anymore." For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard. Then his face crumpled. "You loved me once. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at him, really looked. The man who had once been my comfort, now reduced to a stranger drowning in the consequences he created. "It means I learned," I said, "and that's enough." Then I closed the door. He stood outside for a while. I could hear him pacing, muttering, maybe crying. Then silence. When I finally peeked through the curtain, he was gone. I don't know where he went. Maybe to another lie, maybe to another person willing to listen. But I knew this time it wouldn't last. He had run out of stories. The next week was quiet. I focused on small things: cleaning, cooking, reading, sleeping without fear. It felt strange at first, learning how to exist without waiting for someone else's chaos to crash into me. Layla caught me smiling one morning and said, "You look lighter." "I think I am," I said. "I think I finally stopped carrying him." A few days later, I went back to the park where I used to walk when things were bad. The trees were turning gold, and the air smelled like rain. I sat on a bench and watched the world move. People laughing, kids running, life continuing. It hit me how far I'd come. There was no bitterness left, no anger, no revenge fantasy. Just a quiet satisfaction. He had taken so much, but he hadn't taken me. He had broken himself trying to use others as currency, and I had walked away with the only wealth that mattered: peace.